Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Dellinger. I'm the Senior Data Analyst GIS Manager for the Western Piedmont Council of Governments. Welcome to our second in a series of videos looking at the Hickory MSA current employment statistics and the COVID-19 impacts. Today, we're going to look at the June 2020 data. Overall, the data is mixed for our area. There's some areas where clearly the employment situation is improving. However, we are lagging in other areas, and I'll get into a little more detail about that in just a moment. All right, our first slide of the day kind of looks at where we're at in terms of our employment situation. So what we have is looking at June 2019 to June 2020 data from the current employment statistics, and kind of shows pre-pandemic where we were when we hit the bottom in April 2020 and where we're at as of June 2020. So pre-pandemic, we had a 156,400 employment in June 2019. You can see in April it fell to 127,600. So that was a loss of about 30,000 jobs. Between April and May, we did gain some of those jobs back. We gained about 4,000, a little less than 4,000. Between May and June, we gained another 6,000 jobs back. So we're certainly on an upward trend in terms of job recovery. However, we're still about 18,000 or so jobs short of where we were pre-pandemic. So while we've gained about 10,000 of those jobs back, we still have another 18,000 to go. All right, we're looking at the goods producing sector, and then we'll look at the service producing sector here in a minute. Again, the same time frame, June 2019 to June 2020. And you can see in June 2019, we had 46,500 goods producing jobs in the region. And when I say goods producing, that's construction and manufacturing mostly. And in our area, that you're going to see it's mostly manufacturing jobs. April 2020, when the pandemic hit, saw a drop from 46 to 35,000. We gained about 2,500 jobs in the goods producing sector between April and May 2020. Did not see as much growth in the sector between May and June. We only gained about 700 jobs back. And it appears what's going on is that while we had an initial uptick in those jobs when, particularly in the furniture sector, some of those jobs were brought back that had been furloughed, we didn't see as much of that between May and June. We only saw a gain of about 700. So even though some of those furlough positions have been brought back, at least the data is indicating that some of those jobs are still furloughed as of today. So as a result, we have about 8,000 fewer goods producing jobs today than we did in June 2019 or in March of 2020. All right, looking at the service producing side, and this of course includes a variety of different sectors. It's retail trade, professional business services, leisure and hospitality, things like that. So it's kind of a broad category of service providing jobs, but you can see we did pretty well between May and June, had a good recovery. Of course, in June 2019, we had about 110,000 service providing jobs, went to 92,100 in April, gained about 2,400 between April and May. Pretty sizable gain between May and June. We gained back about 5,300 service providing jobs. And what happened between May and June, we entered phase 2 of the governor's COVID-19 phases. So that allowed restaurants to open for in-house dining at a 50% capacity. And some other restrictions were lifted on the service side as well. So that's helped boost that number some. We're still about 10,000 jobs short of where we were in March of 2020. So we had a good gain last month, but we've still got a little ways to go to get back to where we were pre-pandemic levels. All right, now let's look at the jobs with the biggest percentage losses between June 2019 and June 2020. And I want to point out a change on this graphic. If you were here for the first in the video series last month, you would have noticed that leisure and hospitality actually had the biggest percentage job loss. It would have shown a loss of 40%. But as you can see here, it's actually in third place. It shows a loss of 24.3. So what has happened is that furniture now has the biggest percentage loss. It's 32.6. So what that means is a third of the furniture jobs, they have still not been recalled back yet as of June 2020. And this data would have been taken around June 10th of the month. You also see textiles is in second place. It's at a 27.6% loss. So those goods producing industries by percentage have had the biggest loss. And I think that's part of the reason why when you looked at the goods producing graphic a couple slides ago, it only showed a gain of 700 between May and June. And a lot of that has to do with these two sectors that have not recalled, they've recalled some of their workers back, but they certainly haven't recalled all of them back. Some of the other service losses, you'll see professional business services, healthcare, they've got 15 to 20% losses. That continues to improve, but they've still got a little ways to go to get back to where they were at pre-pandemic levels. All right, now let's look at the gains between May and June of 2020. And you can see clearly leisure and hospitality had a really big rebound. So going from phase 1 to phase 2 of the governor's plan, that had a big impact on leisure and hospitality because that includes the restaurant sector. So that has allowed at least some of the employees that were in that sector that were laid off when the pandemic hit and in-house dining was closed, at least some of them have come back to work, and it clearly shows in that number. Textile mills has shown a recovery as well, even though it still is at a 27% loss from June to June. It did gain almost a quarter of its jobs back between May and June. So this could be a positive sign for the region. What I'm thinking is going on here is that some of these textile mills have gotten into PPE operations where they're making masks and cloth and that sort of thing. So that's a positive sign. We'll see if that trend continues going forward, but it does show some positive signs for the textile industry in our area. The other sectors, the gains are much smaller. You can see professional business had a 6% gain. Retail crept back a little bit at 4%. That administrative and waste management you see at the end, those are temp jobs. So we have seen some recovery in temp jobs. Hopefully that will eventually lead to full-time employment. All right, how are we doing versus other areas? And this is something that we're always interested in. We can't think of ourselves in a bubble. We have to think about what other metro areas in the state are doing. So if you look at the June 2019 to June 2020 numbers for the state's 15 metro areas, you'll notice that we have a 12.1% loss. And that is actually the highest percentage loss of the 15 MSAs. So what that means is our recovery as a region has actually been the slowest of all the metro areas. And the reason why our percentage loss is at 12%, a lot of that has to do with furniture. So it made a pretty good bounce back between March and April, but it's been a lot slower to recover between May and June. And that has tended to drag our average down a little bit to where we still are 12% lower than we were in June of 2019, while some of the other areas, in fact, most of the other metros in the state are now showing a less than 10% loss. And the 12.1, of course, is much higher than the state average at 7.5%. Now, looking at the job change between May and June, again, looking at our numbers versus the other areas, recovery-wise, 4.6%. Again, a lot of that was in leisure and hospitality. That's not a bad number. when you look at the other areas in the state. It's not what Asheville and Burlington and Wilmington did. Of course, they had a bigger recovery in leisure and hospitality. They have more of those jobs to begin with. But I think 4.6% is okay. So if we can keep that pace up, maybe in a few months we won't have the biggest net loss like we saw between the June 2019 and June 2020 number for our metro area. Looking at the goods producing sector between June 2019 and June 2020, we see a 16.8% loss. Again, a lot of that's driven by furniture and textiles. It's the second biggest loss among the metro areas. It's more than double the state average of 7%. Durham Chapel Hill had the highest percentage loss of 17.7, followed by the Hickory area 16.8 and the Rocky Mount MSA with 14.5. So again, furniture has a lot to do with this. So the quicker that those jobs are recovered, the better our goods producing employment numbers will look. On the service side, or well, let's look at May to June goods producing first. 1.8% growth between May and June of 2020. That's on the slow side compared to the other metro areas, because Greensboro had the biggest gain. They gained 10% in a month, which is really good for them. Wilmington was 8.5, Burlington was 8.7. Comparison, we were only 1.8. So it's a little bit slower than the state average, and it's slower than many of the metro areas. And again, that has to do with a lack of furloughed furniture workers coming back between May and June. So how long that takes for those workers to come back, that's going to determine how quickly our goods producing numbers will come back. On the service producing side, 10.1% job loss between June of 2019 and June of 2020. That's in line with many of the metro areas in the state. You can see Asheville was 10.7, we're at 10.1, Wilmington's at 11 compared to our 10.1. So our percentage loss is actually pretty even with a lot of the metro areas. It is a little bit more than the state average at 7.5%. While we don't have as much leisure and hospitality as in Asheville or Wilmington, we do have a lot of jobs in that sector. And when they lost a lot of employment in March, that's tended to drag our numbers down a little bit. Now, looking at the May to June numbers, we had a pretty sizable gain. We went up 5.7% on the service providing side. That's really good. It's better than the state average. Again, it's not the recovery that Asheville's had. They're at 10.4%. But 5.7% for service is actually pretty good. Leisure and hospitality, you can see the change between June 2019 and June 2020. We're showing a loss of 24.3% over that period, pretty close to the state average. Not as bad as several of the metro areas in the state. You notice Durham had a 40% loss between June 19 and June 2020. Raleigh was almost at 35%, Rocky Mount 38, Wilmington 35.8, Asheville 30.6. So our percentage loss compared to those areas, not quite as bad as some of the bigger metro areas in the state. And in terms of recovery between May and June, we did pretty well. Again, not as good as Asheville at 66.7% increase, but 47.4 is pretty good. And a lot of that gain, again, had to do with restaurants reopening. So I hope you found this information helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at the office. You can give me a call at 828-485-4233, or you can email me at taylor.dellinger@wpcog.org. And we will continue this series for the next few months. It'll be interesting to see how the data changes for a region and how quickly we regain the jobs that were lost in the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for joining us today.